Every film lover has probably had the experience of seeing a movie, which when you see it for the first time, you think, wow, they really, really have captured the way things are. It's just like life. And it's an interesting experience. So a couple of years later, maybe you watch the movie a second time, and it's not quite right. And you're probably going to attribute something like, oh, well, it's the second time I've seen it. I can't expect to be as moved as I was the first time. But then let's say you go even further, let's say 5, 10 years down the line, and you watch it again, and it just doesn't work anymore. It's dated. You can't figure out why, but you're aware of the costumes, you're aware of the hairstyles, there might be some slang that isn't current anymore, and even some of the attitudes may have changed in that amount of time. So then the question becomes, how could something have been so moving, so convincing when you first see it, and then much later be so dated? And the answer to this question is, ironically, precisely because it was so convincing the first time. That's to say, it was a capital R realist work that moved you into thinking that what you were experiencing is pretty much just like life. Now, I'm not talking about documentaries. I'm talking about narrative fiction, where you are convinced that what you're watching is almost like being there at the moment. So how is this possible? Well, it's because realism is a style. It's an ism, just like expressionism or classicism or impressionism, whatever. These are all styles, which is to say they're all a set of conventions and expectations about how a work should function. What's unique about realism is that it is based on the idea of convincing the viewer, reader, whatever, that he or she is experiencing reality, that they're hiding the fact that this is a construction, a work of art in the broad sense. In other words, all the effort is put on being a convincing vision of reality as it currently exists. And that's exactly why much later it seems so dated, because time has moved on, whereas the film, say, is more or less a static record of the moment when it was made. And so the most obvious manifestation of this are things like fashion. But fashion is also the most superficial way of looking at reality. Film as a medium is always realistic because it's photographic, which is to say when we watch a film, we expect it to be a real car, a real cigarette, a real gun, whatever. But that's really the most superficial kind of realism. And so when you get into the other aspects of realism, with the attitudes, the structures, the unspoken expectations at a given moment, those change. But the film doesn't. It's still a record of what was true at the moment that it was made. And so that's how datedness happens. And the irony in all of this is it's precisely those works that are most convincing when you first see them that are most likely to become dated. Now, you're probably thinking, well, there are plenty of older films that I still enjoy that I can watch repeatedly. And of course, that's true. We all have those. But there are various reasons why that should be the case. One is what I would call the camp function. You enjoy an older movie precisely because it seems so dated and antique. Another one that more positive is you simply enjoy it, that it's a good story, you enjoy the story for what it is, and you're not really paying attention to how it's dated, how some aspects of it no longer are true. But all that means is that the convincing illusion of reality that was so important is not an important aspect of enjoying the film. In other words, it has plenty of other things to offer you that illusion of reality is not there. The third way that an older film can continue to move is a more subtle one, and it's based on the idea that it always was stylized and always has been clear and upfront about being stylized. Now, the most obvious example of this are things like costume films, because to meet that minimum expectation of reality, of physical reality, they have to be stylized. They have to look like a different period than the one in which you're experiencing the film. But the idea here is that that initial stylization sets up a distance between your expectation and the illusion of reality. And because that distance is there from the beginning, as time progresses, you are not really concerned about things have changed because they were always a little off, if you will, from the very beginning. So the point being that obvious stylization from the beginning is one way of avoiding datedness down the line. Another way of looking at this is that stylization is based on the reality of the artifact rather than exploiting the artifice of realism.